Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan is Singapore's Minister for Foreign Affairs. He joins Sri and I around the desk here at the SGX in a CNBC exclusive interview. Minister, good morning. Great to see you. Welcome back. How are you?
Great to be back.
How
in
are
person,
you? You're
face to face.
You're back from on the road, right?
Yes, I have been.
Yeah.
It's been a whirlwind. The diplomatic calendar is full. The key point is full resumption, full service, face to face. So it's been a very hectic. That's good. Yeah. That's essential.
Okay, so G20. I know you were at in Bali, right? And
yes.
we were there as well. And Sri was up in Bangkok at the APEC summit, which we'll get to in just a bit. The Biden-Xi meeting. How important was that?
No, that was critical.
Yeah.
I think the whole world was watching. Would they meet, and how would that meeting go? The way I would describe it is that it was necessary, first, to establish a floor to the relationship, because quite frankly, the relationship has been sliding downwards the last couple of years, no doubt about that. Face-to-face meeting between two men who actually know each other well, have a certain reservoir of goodwill and candor. That's very, very useful. So that was something which we all were looking forward to, and we're glad it occurred. The other point I would add is that it, in a sense, allowed both sides to telegraph what they call their red lines and their bottom lines. That's absolutely essential. And it's no accident that after that you see a flurry of meetings occurring at a ministerial, secretarial level. Yes.
Yeah, understood. So, Singapore's Ministry of Foreign Affairs is almost famed for the quality of the people, right? I'm not so sure, and I'm saying this as an American, right, that the same can be said at the State Department right now, because it's been hollowed out over several years, right? At the working level, the teams that are meeting across all the areas of friction in the U.S.-China relationship, China obviously is not short of people or expertise. What about the U.S. side, and does that concern you?
The U.S. side, I know well from direct interaction. There's no question about the high quality. These are experienced, seasoned diplomats, people who've been thinking through issues for years, even when they were out of office. I have no reservations or doubts about the quality of diplomacy.
Minister, to what degree did the face-to-face and very constructive first step meeting between Xi Jinping and President Biden, de-risk US-China relations as it applies to the trade and commerce sphere and as it applies to the geopolitics in Taiwan, specifically for our region?
I think de-risk may be overstating the case. I mean, this is just the first round. As I said, bottom lines and red lines. The risk factors, the strategic misalignment is still there. On China's side, they worry about an America that is unable to cope with, for the first time ever, a historical strategic competitor. And they worry that America is trying by all means possible to contain or to suppress them. On the American side, certainly a significant strain of thought is that China has unfairly and perhaps coercively taken advantage of globalization. So they are starting from two quite almost mutually reconcilable perspectives. And there's still a long way to go. But as I said, bottom lines, red lines are important, so you don't inadvertently stumble into conflict. So it's just the beginning. Okay,
just the beginning. Mr. The Xi-Biden meeting and the talks sort of overshadowed the still very important work of the G20 on critical issues like the energy crisis, energy inflation, as well as food inflation. But we did have a little bit of movement and finally a conclusion in terms of the Black Sea grain access deal, as well as just a couple of days ago, the price cap on Russian oil. How optimistic are you that both of these are going to work specifically to help energy as well as food inflation in Singapore temper down?
Well, let's deal first with the grain deal. And for that, I really want to give full credit to Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General. We met him, obviously, and I tell you, every time I bumped into him or met him, he was on the phone, and I knew there was only one topic on his mind, and that was negotiating was the grain deal. So give him full credit for that deal. I think it's important that that gets done because actually the grain is there. The granaries are full. And for it not to get out to the parts of the world, especially in Africa,
It's literally a waste.
and it's a crime,
Yeah.
right? So I really want to give full credit to Antonio Guterres for that. On the oil price cap, I have to confess to being a bit more skeptical. Look, right now, if you look at Brent spot price, it must be, what, low 80s? If you look at the Urals spot price, I think it's in the low 60s. An oil price cap of 60, you know, it's arguable how much impact it'll have on the market. I think the real driver for oil prices is what's happening in China and the announcements that I expect they would make shortly.
Ah, okay. Any insight? Because we had sort of the 20 points a few weeks ago. Now we're hearing a lot of chatter and reports that come tomorrow, Wednesday, there could be a further 10 points added onto that to reflect even further easing of restrictions.
I don't have any, privileged insight into what's happening in Beijing. But let's take a step back. The Omicron virus variant is highly contagious. We know about that. We faced it. But fortunately, less virulent. So in terms of the medium to long-term playbook, it's obvious. You can open up if you've got high vaccination rates. So I'll be watching to see what efforts China makes to ramp up vaccination in the seniors. Second, you do need to increase healthcare capacity. And in a place as large as China, it's one thing to talk about healthcare facility in Shanghai, but once you get into the far west or in the rural areas, you face considerable challenges. So based on that, I think the playbook is obvious. I do expect China to open. It's just a matter of time. Second, I would expect to see a more variegated response, which means it can't be one size fits all. The key variables that every public official in every city and province in China will be, what's my vaccination rate for seniors? What's my medical capacity? And then you do need to make changes to your protocols for, whether people can quarantine at home, how many days they need to take off from work, all the things which, in a sense, we've already done in Singapore. And what Singapore illustrates is that you can, with enlightened, careful, deliberate policy and preparation, open up fully. That's where we're at.
I've got to ask you about the protests that we've seen in some of the major Chinese cities. What's your take on that? And to what degree did that outpouring of anxiety and pent-up frustration have a bearing on the decision by the leadership to start loosening up these restrictions?
Again, I wouldn't overread that. I see the protests as just frustration and impatience with the law. And frankly, I think at this stage of the pandemic, if any administration anywhere in the world tried to lock down, you would face considerable resistance. So I see that as almost par for the cause. The question now is how quickly China will respond. And at least based on my interactions with Chinese officials, I think their primary parameter is public health. And as I said, I do expect them to open, I do expect the process to take time, and I expect a variegated response according to circumstances.
We're hearing about a late March timeline in terms of a full reopening, and I must admit things seem to be leading up favourably into that direction. Does that make sense to you in terms of
Well, we're now in
the
December. Look at our experience in Singapore. When Delta hit us last year, actually there were moments last year when we were worried about capacity, healthcare capacity to deal with the waves. By the time this year came around and we had Omicron, BA1, 2, then BA4 and 5, and then XBB, we had 3 waves this year. But with high vaccination rates, with sufficient capacity, we were able to ride out the waves. We expect another wave now as we all travel and resume full service all over the world. But we are reasonably confident that we'll get through this. Now, the point is, China can do this But you need to understand that they are huge, they are variegated, and they'll need time. So sometime between the next 3 to 6 months, I would expect to see a significant opening. Now that has profound implications for the global economy.
Oh, absolutely.
More so than an oil price cap.
Indeed, especially we were talking about this earlier on the program. If China's demand, 1.4 billion people start spending and traveling again, that has profound implications for inflation. If we can just round off this part of the conversation, Minister, and bring it back home to Singapore, 2023, what is that going to look like in terms of the next phase, if I can call it that, or the next dimension to the reopening post-pandemic? What is that going to look like, and what shape is our health service, is our economy in?
Well, as far as the pandemic is concerned, we're in a good place.
Yes.
We've been able to ride out the 3 waves this year. Our mortality rate, or excess mortality after nearly 3 years, is amongst the lowest in the world. So we've illustrated that with trust, that with cooperation, with an educated response that is flexible enough. I mean, look, we were not perfect, but we were able to correct our mistakes and correct it quickly. Our population cooperated fully. There's trust not just between the experts and the people, but between people themselves, and that engenders a certain self-responsibility, collective responsibility. We've obviously invested in capacity, and we have amongst some of the highest vaccination rates in the world. So frankly, as far as COVID pandemic for now, we're as good a spot as any. I think we'll have to watch carefully over the next 3 to 6 months as China opens up, and you have 1.4,
Starting to travel again outside the country?
COVID-naive population.
Yeah.
Suddenly getting waves sweeping through that. And we know that this virus is capable of generating new variants. I mean, obviously, we'll have to pay attention to that. But so on our case, we stand ready. We see no reason to slow down our opening. And I mean, there's hardly any restrictions left anyway.
Back to normal.
So back to normal, full steam ahead. That's on the economic front. We are worried about inflation. And clearly, obviously, in the case of Singapore, because of the nature of our economy, trade 3 times our GDP, everything we eat, drink, and use is imported. We'll have to watch those inflation figures carefully. We do need to make sure our social safety nets, in particular, in making sure that the less well-off families are able to afford energy, food, water, and all the other essentials of life. So we are paying attention to that side of it. More medium term, you've heard DPM Lawrence Wong talk about a new social compact.
Yes.
To take into account inequality and to make sure we uplift everyone collectively. I mean, these are some of the essential political imperatives that we're focused on.
And defeating income inequality.
Absolutely.
Minister, if I can just circle back to
Yes.
the geopolitical picture, and we discussed how profound an impact the Ukraine war has had on supply chains, on energy, and on food prices. It seems abundantly clear that President Putin is losing the ground war in Ukraine, arguably losing the war in the court of public opinion as well. Does this herald potentially a new dangerous path, though, in this conflict?
I think there's always been great danger. When a nuclear superpower embarks on an all-out hot war, there's always grave danger. I think President Putin expected Ukraine not to resist. He expected a dependent and divided Europe and an impotent United States and an irrelevant NATO. What we've witnessed in the last 10 months is there's no doubt about Ukraine's will to fight and to assert its sovereignty. Europe has been united, NATO has expanded, and the US transatlantic relationship has been strengthened. So he's in a very awkward strategic spot. The fact that the conventional war has gone badly for Russia, in fact, increases the risk. And if you get a catastrophic collapse, who knows what temptations will come their way. So it's something we still need to watch with grave anxiety.
Before that, though, what do you think the prospects are for talks between President Biden of the U.S. and Putin? And now we've got France and Emmanuel Macron getting in the mix as well, trying to broker some kind of a stalemate, if not peace, but suggesting and siding with Russia and Putin's insistence that, look, if we're going to sit down and talk and do any sort of deal, it's got to include security guarantees for Russia, which the rest of Europe is just up in arms about.
Well, the only insights I have are from direct interactions with the foreign minister of Ukraine and obviously my old friend Sergei Lavrov of Russia. Unfortunately, right now, I don't think they're in the mood to talk, both sides. Unfortunately, I see a bloody hard slog of attrition in the near future. Now, we all know that at the end it's going to be at the negotiating table, but both sides are trying to achieve through military means an optimal bargaining position. So unfortunately, lives and blood are still being shed in order to achieve negotiating advantage. So that's where we're at now. I'm concerned, depressed even, about this.
You know, as are we, but a little bit more optimistically and closer to where we are home, just across the border, Malaysia. New government, Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim, Prime Minister, finally after 25 years.
I think it's a lifelong dream for him.
And he's finally realized it. But I mean, this government, we saw what happened in 2018, didn't last very long. What are the prospects this time, do you think?
Well, this is something the Malaysians will have to sort out. Fortunately for us, we know virtually every single one of them because of past interactions. In a sense, they were all from UMNO to begin with. So the personalities are not new. I think the big question mark, as always in Malaysia, is the management of race, language, and religion, and how that manifests itself in terms of politics and governance. Malaysia is an incredibly blessed country. Huge amount of natural resources, hardworking, dynamic, innovative people. So it's just a question of how much of that harvest they're able to tap. From Singapore's perspective, what we hope for is a stable, peaceful, prosperous Malaysia. It's our immediate neighbor. And obviously, anything positive there is a plus for us. And if there's trouble and instability there, it makes it harder for us. So we, in all sincerity, we wish Datuk Sri Anwar all the very best.
Indeed. How concerned are you, though, about the rise or continued influence or greater influence now of PAS, which is the extremist Islamic party, right? 49 seats, more seats than any other party in the elections. And this isn't just in the north of the country, right? I think their reach is extended even further out now.
I've interacted with the leaders of PAS.
Hadi Awang?
Including Hadi Awang. I visited him in his own constituency.
Okay.
They're a confident political party who believe that the tide of history is on their side.
Clean so far.
And they have succeeded. You look at the latest outcome. But they're a political party. They have secured 4 states this time, and certainly in the heartlands of Kelantan and Terengganu, there's no question about that. And they believe that their brand, a certain religious conservatism, a reputation for competence and incorruptibility is appealing. And certainly that is borne out by the election. So, as I said, the eternal question for Malaysia, management of race, language, and religion. And whoever can do that in a credible way, whoever can offer good governance and incorruptibility will have enormous appeal. So I'm not surprised.
Good governance and incorruptibility are watchwords and key aspirations for Sri Lanka as well. And you and I have talked about Sri Lanka a lot and about the enormous potential there. And if I can just go back, Minister, to earlier this year, and I wanted to ask you why Singapore granted former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa entry into Singapore, not asylum. And let's make that very clear, because many Sri Lankans I talked to in Sri Lanka and amongst the diaspora here were quite shocked and quite angered that this happened, and optically it did send arguably the wrong message.
I would take a step back.
Yes.
And I would say the most important thing was that transfer of power occurred peacefully. When the president arrived in Singapore, he was still the president. He then formally tendered his resignation. He was an ordinary Sri Lankan citizen, and we treated him exactly as that. He stayed for less than a month, which any Sri Lankan citizen was entitled to. We didn't give him any privileges, immunities, or protection. Again, it's the rule of law. It's behaving in a considered, careful, and fair way. And I think we did that. To the extent that perhaps it may have helped with that peaceful transition of power, I'm glad that happened. He has now gone back to Sri Lanka, and I hope that national reconciliation will occur, because look, I've been to Sri Lanka many times. We know Sri Lankan people all over the world. They're successful, they're innovative, they're hardworking. Sri Lanka is a blessed island, deserves so much more, but they do need a political system that is reconciled amongst all. Again, it's race, language, and religion comes into it as well. And it gives people a fair shot and to fulfill their potential. I hope that path remains wide open for Sri Lanka.
Indeed. Right, on a lighter note, very quickly, Minister, watching World Cup?
Yes, like I said, I couldn't stay up last night though because of this session.
Favorite team?
We are looking for, I personally hope Brazil makes it.
Okay.
And I think our best wishes go obviously for Pelé.
Indeed, yeah.
So for sentimental and other reasons, we all hope Brazil gives him a wonderful gift.
Understood. Minister, excellent talking to you. It's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Come back to see us again very soon.
Thank you, Steve.
Dr.
Wonderful
Vivian Balakrishnan there, Singapore's Minister for Foreign Affairs, joining Sri and I live here around the desk at the SGX.